We have Andy Boyan. He's the founder and CEO of Dovetail Solutions, a full professional communications firm specializing in media relations, branding and messaging, crisis and issues management, digital marketing, working with a number of candidate and issue-based campaigns. He has served as a senior campaign strategist and advisor for more than 25 years. Sandra Hagan Solin, who I know so many of you have seen, she helps the Women's Chamber out with many of our legislative issues. She's the founder and president of Capital Solutions Group, a full service lobbying, grassroots training and consulting for legislative and regulatory concerns at all government levels. This is a fun fact, and I don't even think I knew this. One of Sandra's first clients when she founded her company was the Women's Chamber. Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea. And I think I will introduce her now, but we do have Senator Angela Williams, who's expected to join us. I think she's having some technical difficulties, but I'm going to introduce her now. She represents District 33, Northeast Denver neighborhoods of Curtis Park, Cole Community, Whittier, 5 Points, East Colfax, Park Hill, Green Valley Ranch, and Montbello. Senate District 33 includes the world-class Denver International Airport, and Williams is known as the Democrat business champion of the Colorado General Assembly. Okay, so with that, I'm going to kick off our questions. So I heard a lot, and I don't know if you all had heard this as well. So many people felt like Obama was really far to the left, and then, you know, some people weren't surprised that when Trump was elected, he's so far to the right, and that there was going to be a course correction. And I remember reading about that in the New York Times. With the latest election updates, do you think that there's a course correction, or where are we going to be on the next presidential election? And I think for that one, I will start with Andy Boyan.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you to the Colorado Women's Chamber of Commerce for hosting this, and thank you to fellow panelists as well. It's nice to have you here, and nice to be a part of this. You know, there's a lot of talk about left and right and progressive and conservative, and what Barack Obama represented during his 8 years in office and what he represented even after he left office. And the 2016 election, I think, shows that there was some fatigue from some of the policies of the Obama administration that really sort of led into folks either not voting or perhaps voting for a candidate that they felt could reverse or change some of the policies that President Obama and his administration put in place. And I think what we've seen over the last few years, and this is not a political statement, but we have seen dramatic course correction in terms of what President Obama did and what he put in place, and nothing more relevant or prevalent than the last few days at the Supreme Court when they heard arguments to the Affordable Care Act and its not only individual mandate extinction, but also whether the act should stay in place. And so I think you see the country, not only at the executive level, but also at the judicial level, and we will even more so at the legislative level, see changes made and things start to shift a little bit in the direction of some course corrections on both sides that will lead to some decisions which will profoundly change the landscape, both on the left and the right, and perhaps even in the moderate, in the middle, that will reflect America today. We had never had more people vote in a presidential election than this one. Over 150 million people voted. Which is, I applaud people like Stacey Abrams in Georgia and other female strong leaders around the country, including the Vice President-elect, who helped bring women out and bring minorities and bring folks out that normally felt disenfranchised to have a voice. And so I think that really has changed the course as well. And whatever happens, wherever we end up, I'm excited about the future. And I think we'll see a lot of change forthcoming.
Great, thank you, Andy. Heidi, I'm going to tee that over to you.
So I'm such a moderate that
I know, that's why I chose you next.
Some of my friends call me a rhino, Republican in name only.
Yeah,
because I am such a moderate. But I think that that's okay. I think that I think that a lot of us are like that, whether we're, you know, a Democrat or Republican or not affiliated. I think a lot of us kind of live in that middle lane. And I think for me, my hope was that if, you know, Vice President Biden or now President-elect Biden were to be elected, that it would, you know, hopefully bring some reform to the Republican Party in the fact that, you know, recognizing that the party needs to, you know, maybe reevaluate some of their platform and their policies, especially around social issues, social justice issues, and those sorts of things. Because a lot of the folks that I know that are more conservative, like in the middle, but still conservative, most of us are really much more liberal when it comes to social issues. And so for me, I just hope that this really makes everyone in America more thoughtful about the issues that should really be human issues and not political issues. So immigration, you know, substance use disorder, homelessness, and sexual identity, those types of things really need to become human issues and stop being political. And so my hope is, yay, we have, you know, now we've broken some glass ceilings, and for women especially, like, we need to do a better job of supporting women and people of color in their journey and in their successes, and helping people get where they need to be and where they should be, and not just, you know, have this continue to be the same old America that it always has been. It's a great country and I'm so blessed to live here, but I think we can do better. And I hope this election gets us there.
Thanks, Heidi. Councilman Herndon, what do you think?
Well, first, Kristen, thank you so much for having me here to speak to the group. It's interesting. I was just looking on the computer, so I'm going to date myself and let everyone know how old I am. But I looked to see the party affiliations for all the presidents over the course of my lifetime. And so starting with Jimmy Carter, and there have been 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. And as you start to notice that it's a pendulum that swings. Well, the electorate is comfortable with one party for a while, and then it tends to shift. And more recent history, it hasn't been more than 8 years, whether it be George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, et cetera. The one exception deals with Ronald Reagan, and then he was followed by a one-term George H.W. Bush. So I think what that should tell some of our party leaders is that we have to you can't just blindly assume that the electorate is just going to continue to vote for you based off your party. These past 8 presidents, it kind of demonstrates, are you speaking to the issues that are at people's hearts when it comes to what's important during those times? And if you're not, you'll see the pendulum go the other way, just as we've seen for the past several presidents.
That's so interesting. And you found that in like 2 minutes. So it's really, I mean, I have to say that restores some of my faith in the system hearing that, right? Because if I'm hearing you correctly, that truly means that people are voting with their hearts, like what matters to them, what's important to them.
That's definitely how I read into it. As you can see how it just suddenly swings, whether a president can be very successful during their 8 years, but all of a sudden it goes towards the other directions. And I'll let pundits and analysts figure out why exactly that is happening, but that seems to be a trend as of late.
Awesome, thanks. Sandra, what do you think? That's a good place for you to kind of kick off.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And I think it is a reminder to those parties in control to be mindful of overreaching, overstepping, not being considerate of the other half of the country who voted the other way. I think when in this election cycle, when you dive deeper into the results around the country, there were several state houses that went Republican. Not all of the congressional seats that were anticipated to shift blue shifted. They either held red or stayed red. And so we are truly at a place where there is a lot of difference of opinion, but most importantly, I think there's really a middle ground that is permeating this country. And it's really imperative that the Democrats in control, the Republicans in the Senate, be mindful of the need to come together and find that middle ground to ultimately secure progress for our country in a way that's meaningful for everyone. We've heard, I think both parties, and Heidi alluded to this, sort of there's extremes on both sides and a lot of noise in that space. And some in both camps within the middle have highlighted the fact, and I think James Carville, of particular note, just recent days said, the Democrat Party needs to recognize that much of the messaging that we saw that they were conveying during the cycle was directed really towards a sliver, in his language, a sliver of his party. And if they are to be successful, and that expansion of consideration around issues really becomes important. But the message is the same on the right. It's imperative that, to Heidi's point, that there be a regrouping, if you will, a reassessment of the Republican Party. President Trump has loomed so large and has really taken the mantle for the Republican Party when it really isn't reflective of the core of the Republican Party in many respects. And so how do they navigate his personality as a non-president in this environment will be really a really important pivot point for the Republican Party, and how they manage that will be essential. So obviously we're in a place right now where we don't know. He's having a breakdown, right? He's just in full resist mode, and we've got to get through this piece, but ultimately the Republican Party is going to have to assess and regroup and sort of get back to their roots and look towards that middle. And hopefully we all are working together.
Great, thank you. This has always been sort of a long-standing question of mine. And now, since it's more part of my role, I'm more engaged than ever. And I have, great advisors like Sandra and Heidi and others that have helped me learn more. But I'd love to hear your opinions and thoughts on how we get people better engaged with ballots and voting. Because still, I think like this year's ballot was freaking crazy, right? Like the amount of work that you needed to do to just be able to vote and vote truly how you felt with the way that things are worded. What are your ideas, or what do you think that we could do to do a better job to get people prepared with ballots and voting? And Chris, I'll start with you.
It's a hard question to figure out, but I think it takes everyone's responsibility to help solve this. I think it takes me as an elected official, because there are still individuals who don't believe elected officials are out for their own best interest. And it's not a matter of just reaching out to individuals during election season. A city council term is 4 years. I need to demonstrate over 4 years that I'm committed to hearing the voice of the people. And that's by being accessible, that's by being thoughtful, and that's about making sure that their opinions are being heard. And you do that over time. And then when they hear Councilman Herndon say, hey, it's important to vote, whatever the issue is, I think that resonates more with them as opposed to, hey, he just showed up during election season. But I also think it's on us as individual voters to make sure we are doing the research on all these various issues and making sure we understand them. I think people don't realize the repercussions, and I say that whether good or bad, of how a decision can swing from one way to the other. And then I also think when we watch the different media outlets, we've got to get away from the partisanship. Let's just have conversations about the issues at heart and try to do it without a political bent. Just say, what are the facts of the issues? And I think that will help us get there, but it's going to require everyone's part to essentially do better, because the partisan warfare that's happening now is the greatest loser in all of this is our country.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Andy, what do you think about that? Because I definitely can appreciate what Councilman Herndon's saying about it's our job as voters, but I'd like to hear your perspective from, you have a media agency and it's your job to get those messages out there. What do you think we could do better?
Well, I think the councilman's right about, everybody has a responsibility here, but I think it also has to do with the ballot itself. If you looked at this ballot, for example, it was a significant ballot. First of all, I heard all the time how much was on the ballot, and it seemed somewhat overwhelming to folks. And there were lots of questions about reading it correctly and the language inside the ballot initiative. Did it make sense, or was it trying to be, sort of ambiguous intentionally to confuse the voter. So two things ought to happen, in my opinion. One is that we ought to look at making it more difficult, perhaps, to get things on the ballot in Colorado in the first place, because it was such a packed ballot, and I felt like the everyday voters that wanted to take part felt overwhelmed, and they felt like this was something that they needed to either ask for help, or they needed to just go with what their friend was doing, what their spouse was doing, or what their community felt was important. And then they were also heavily reliant, Kristen, on the advertising that went out. And so they looked at things and read things and saw things and were really swayed in that direction. I think the councilman's exactly right. We need to remove the partisanship from all of this and really look at it factually. But the language and the way in which things are said are so important. And to make sure that people not only understand and are feeling confident about what they're voting on, but also that they have the information they need to make an informed decision in the first place. That's a really important part of this process. And I don't think that it's any one person's responsibility to do so. I think it's everybody's, but I think that organizations like yours, and the councilman said, it's his as well. I think it's all of ours to make sure that the language is clear, people feel included, and that the actual ballot initiatives that make it to the ballot have been scrutinized enough so that they are actually something that voters care about enough to vote on. And I think that ought to be a consideration for the state of Colorado going forward.
Ooh, that was a juicy answer. Okay, I'm going to follow up with our two other panelists because I know them well and I know a little bit how they think. So Heidi, I want to know what you think, because I've always thought of you, and your purpose for running for mayor in the first place is because, you got upset with the way things were worded in the process, and you're like, I'm going to go in and change that. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on like how ballots are worded and the complication of it all, and how we could do better with that? Or just love to hear what you think.
So part of the problem is that we have the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, whether you think it's a problem or not. It does limit the way we have to word the language in the ballot. And so that is a huge issue here in Colorado. And so a lot of times, even when I was on city council, we would be looking at something to put on the ballot and we were like, but that's so confusing. People aren't going to understand it. And the attorneys were like, but that's how we have to do it. So to kind of piggyback off of that. So several years ago, we approved marijuana to be legal in the state. The commercials, to Andy's point, really showed like kids in a classroom and how they were going to get all this money if marijuana was legalized. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is that it took a Tabor vote a year later to actually make that happen. And the way that they made it sound is it would be money for teachers and money for this. And it was really just money for capital. And a lot of times that's in a matching grant. So for smaller, rural school districts, it is almost impossible for them to get the money. So I just think that the hard part is for people who aren't engaged and involved, like those of us on the call, it's hard to know what to believe. And I use the Blue Book like a Bible, and then I research from there. That Blue Book you get in the mail, like I'm super nerdy and get super excited when I get my Blue Book in the mail. But I'm a little less engaged than I was when I was the mayor. And so I did have to research some of the issues. And the fun part is that my husband and I actually did not vote together this time. And we actually voted differently on some things. And so I think that shows you, especially because we've never done that before, we've always voted the same. I think it shows you just how interesting this ballot was and how many people, even of the same ilk, if you will, took different approaches to it. So I think that it is about educating yourselves, and to the extent that the Women's Chamber and our elected officials and folks like me and Sandra and Andy can really reach out and do a better job of helping people understand, and not telling people how to vote, but helping them understand. I think that's key.
Thanks, Heidi. And I will ask, because I don't want to get into like having to talk through it, but if all of the panelists have ideas or others have ideas where they want to post, where you can do the research, because every single one of you so far has mentioned that, do your research. I think Councilman Herndon is exactly right. We as consumers listen to the commercials. commercials are only going to talk about one side of it. We need to know both sides if we're truly going to vote. So if you have ideas on research places, please feel free to post them in the chat so that people can look at those. Yeah. Sandra, what do you think about that? Like, I love the idea that Andy has of like making it more difficult to get things on the ballot, but kind of given what you do for a living, I'd love to hear your opinion on that, because there sure was a lot this year.
There was, and you know, Colorado is one of the easiest places in which to secure a question on the ballot. And we've seen 2 or 3 years ago, we saw an initiative that was successful that elevated the amount of the required vote passage for a constitutional amendment. So you're beginning to see that conversation unfold about the ensuring the complexity and the difficulty to get to the ballot and making it is too easy, quite frankly. Andy's absolutely right. It's just much too easy. And so we find ourselves dealing and contending with matters that really should be legislatively debated. Family leave was one of them. We as an organization were very involved in that debate legislatively, and because the proponents were thwarted, they said, we'll just go straight to the ballot. And so you're left with policy that from a women's chamber perspective went too far. And so the process itself, yes, requires some reform in order to manage not the sheer number, but also the approach. The other thing I would mention, and I think it was noted, the difficulty, the sheer amount, we saw undervotes. People opted not to vote at all on many of the ballot questions because it's either too much, they just don't know. Many opt to vote no. When they don't know, they just vote no. And so that is an indicator of the challenge that we have in ballot questions. The Women's Chamber and organizations like the Women's Chamber really become essential in the education side, but making it really easy for members to understand the issues. I was so proud of the work that the Women's Chamber did this cycle on the ballot questions and really diving. For those who were unfamiliar, we had a really robust conversation and process by which the Women's Chamber understood and took positions on those. And when that type of process exists in an organization, members can rely upon the work that's been done in order to guide their vote. And so I think it really becomes incumbent upon a Women's Chamber to dive in on their behalf, explain the depth to which, and we did this, the depth to which we took positions, and really communicate that out, and then provide the links and the resource. I would agree with Heidi. I think the Blue Book is a Bible for Colorado voters, and thank goodness for that process, because it truly is the bipartisan, nonpartisan, most importantly, nonpartisan way in which to understand the various questions facing voters. And I think it's pretty unique to Colorado in that regard. And Andy would know a little bit more about that in terms of like California. I don't know if they also have very long ballots. But Colorado, from my experience, that Blue Book is a really essential tool for folks. But there's a lot to discuss around ballot reform.
Got it. I'm going to jump to one of the questions in the chat, and I'll encourage all of our viewers to post questions if you have them. And it's a really great question. It's from Tess Cohen, and she wants to hear the panelists' reflections and ideas on tangible ways to rebuild cross-partisan understanding and partnership after 4 years of tremendous division. I think that's really important right now. I have to say, like, I've never seen a country so divided, and I do not like it. I don't like not being able to have political conversations, with friends and things like that. I've never seen it quite so heated before. And so I will start with you, Heidi. What do you think? How are we going to rebuild this?
So my experience as mayor, and I'm sure Chris also has this experience, is that you're working with folks who, well, I was always in the minority in Adams County. It's a, slightly more left county. And so I was always in the minority, and I had to really think hard and listen to what folks were saying. I had to listen to all sides, and I represented constituents on every side of the aisle. And I had to do what was right for them, not necessarily what I wanted as, you know, with my own party affiliation or my own beliefs. And so that really helped me. The other thing is that city council members and mayors go out and have, you know, dinner together. They go to conferences together. They maybe have a cocktail together. And you start to learn that people are not their party. People are people. And you know, somebody told me a long time ago, I don't remember who this was, but somebody said, you know, Congress used to be kind of stuck in DC together. And so they would go have drinks together. They would go have dinner together. They would, like, you know, have conversations. And because it's so easy to fly in and out now, they really don't have that opportunity. So I just think that the collaboration among people, again, getting back to that human aspect, is understanding why people believe what they believe and recognizing that most of us want the same thing. We just have a different way to get there. So I think it's about relationships. It's no different than business. You got to build relationships. And in business, you're not like, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat or a Green Party or whatever? You just want to, like, close the deal and build that relationship. And so I think it's got to get back to more of that.
Great, thanks. Councilman Herndon, I'd love to hear what you think about it. And if you have any experiences that you can share that you've experienced too with your work, I'd love to hear it.
Certainly. If I could be in charge for a day and stop one thing from happening, it would be having these political conversations on social media. Because what I've never seen on social media, I've never seen someone write, wow, after reading what you thought, I now changed my mind. I've never seen that. That's never happened on social media. And I jokingly say it's hard to hate up close. So when I'll get emails from constituents who tell me what a great job I'm doing, and that's very sarcastic, they're not happy about something, and they'll have a phone, and they'll have their phone number, I will call them because I want to have a conversation with you, because people will type things that they would never say to you in person or on the phone. And so let's just talk as human beings to one another. That would be the first thing I would say. We have a disagreement. Let's just have a phone call, and post-COVID or during COVID, let's make a socially distanced conversation that we can have. And I also think too, if we stop talking about the issues and more about the values behind it, we'll realize that we have more in common than we might actually think. So it's not a conversation about issue X. This is a conversation about fairness. This is a conversation about equality. And if you can tailor that to see, this is why I believe in this, because of the principle of fairness. And there are so many different values that we have in common, no matter what your political affiliation is. I think that's how we start to heal. But we really have to get off social media, because that is just inflaming it. And as well as our local electeds be the example. And unfortunately, we have electeds on both sides. I don't want to imply it's just one, that we're just throwing everything out on social media with no dialogue about how factual that is. Just to stop doing that and have a one-on-one conversation and make a connection with a fellow human being.
It's so true. You know, I think about just the Women's Chamber just this session, Sandra, and you'll appreciate this too. You know, paid family and medical leave, right? Like just having the conversation about leave in general, not which side. Everybody's for leave, right? Everybody wants family leave. It's just, you know, how do we do it? And I think if we start from those positions first, we just get so much further. Andy, what do you think?
That's exactly right. I mean, I think to the councilman's point, I mean, in my 30 years in politics, I can tell you that there is much more we have in common than apart. And what happens in politics, unfortunately, is that it gets hyper partisan, and it's not one party doing it more than the other. It's not, you know, I'm not casting aspersions at all. It's about both parties and candidates and issues being so hyper politicized that it becomes us versus them. And when we all look back at how we care about certain things, and family leave is a perfect example of that. We all want family leave. We all care about our families. We all want the best for our families. And at the end of the day, there is a lot more in common than we have apart. Now, there are those out there that would wish to divide us. And to the councilman's point, social media is a perfect avenue to do that. And it is obtuse in its sort of rhetoric. So you can kind of throw it out there and anybody can respond to it. And you can have really energized, oftentimes offensive responses that really turn people off, or you can shut it off and have a conversation. And conversely, you can also engage yourself. You can also get involved and be a part of the system that changes that. Because even at the local level, especially in Denver and surrounding areas, all up and down the Front Range, we are a people that care a lot about our community. We are the second highest, most educated workforce in the nation. We have an unbelievable resilience about us. And really, it's funny, we joked on election night about this state is not a red or blue state, really. I mean, there are, to Sandra's point, there were seats that we thought were going to go D or R that didn't. And it really became an interesting, fascinating watch on what was and what was not partisan, and really how people truly felt about this state. And while we have to count the numbers and we have to count the votes and somebody has to win, it's more about getting together on these things and wishing what's best for our community. And the best way to do that is to make sure that start with the commonality of we all want what's best for this community and for each other. Let's start there, and then build an argument and build a case and build a conversation around that.
Thank you. Sandra, what do you think?
Yeah, I echo all the comments that have been made here. I think what hasn't been directly stated is each of us also needs to be willing to listen to the other side. I think we lost a lot of that in this cycle, and there was a failure to listen, that there may be other points of view out there and valid points of view. To Councilman's point, we all bring different values to the way in which we make decisions, the way in which we live our lives, and not one of them is right or wrong. It's just, it may be different, or some things are more important than other things in the broad spectrum of the values that we bring to the table. And I think it really starts from a point of listening and appreciating that there are differences. But to Andy, to everyone's point, we're all in this for the right reasons. We're wanting to pull in the same direction. We just have different ways of getting there. But there's respect. We have to get back to a place of respect. There is no doubt the last 4 years have been more tumultuous than any of us would have liked. And I honestly believe that we can move back to a place of civil discourse and an elevated conversation around the things that are important to all of us. And I think we've learned some lessons through all of this. The hope, though, to each point is that those of us who are committed to that kind of engagement really do engage, that we don't let those who are driven to further divide are the louder voices. It is so easy to throw up your hands and give up and walk away. I found myself several times like, oh, I'm just done. I'm done with this. But we can't give up. Those of us who are willing to be respectful, willing to listen, can't walk away. You can't walk away.
Thanks. Okay, I'm not going to walk away. Councilman Herndon, and I'll ask all the panelists this, but I want to hear, and it's interesting, kind of both you and Mayor Williams have talked about this, and I want to ask all the panelists this. What is some legislation that you were personally passionate about, right? Because I think this becomes hard, and Heidi, you referenced this a little bit, like, I'm personally passionate about this, but I'm representing my constituency. I want to talk about how, something that has happened in your past. You were personally passionate about it and how you handled that and moved it forward or pulled it back.
If I could pull up a song on my computer, it would be, I think the group's called Baha Men, Who Let the Dogs Out. And if you're not familiar what was happening pre-COVID, right before the pandemic happened, I brought forward legislation to end the 31-year ban on pit bulls in Denver. And the first thing that people always ask me is, how many pit bulls have you had? I haven't had any. I grew up with dogs, but never a particular pit bull. And so growing up with dogs, I realized it's not about a breed that determines a dog's characteristics as much as very partisan websites will tell you. It's about the owner who treats the dog well or bad that determines the dog's behavior, spaying and neutered, health, etc. So I brought forward a compromise in February. City Council approved it, 8 members, and unfortunately Mayor Hancock vetoed it. So we took a step back and we said, all right, the mayor has that right, as his prerogative, but we can send it to the voters. And so we did that this November, once again, allowing pit bull owners to register their dogs with a permit, have some additional regulations, and majority overwhelming, the dogs will be fine. And they get 3 years later, they can license their dog just like any other. 66% of Denver voters approved it. A testament that it really is about the breed bans not working. And so I was just ecstatic that that passed. And, you know, that's tempered with everything that's happening at the federal level. But I was really excited to know that come January 1, we're going to end a breed ban that's been on the books in Denver for 30 plus years.
Wow. Great job.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Yeah, I was happy about that one too. That was some good news about dogs, given everything that's going on. So thank you for bringing that forward. Andy, what about you? Like, I would imagine oftentimes you get asked to promote legislation that you may or may not be personally passionate about. I'd love to hear what you think in some of your experiences.
You know, I'm going to, Chris, I'm going to go way back to, I served on the Democratic National Committee for 4 years, from 2000 to 2004. And this is going to seem kind of frivolous given the importance of all the panelists and what they have to say, but I had the chance to vote for Denver to host the DNC in 2008 as one of my last votes on the DNC in 2004. And it came up for vote, and it was between us and Las Vegas to host the convention. And I knew that in 2008 it was going to be, you know, once we assumed that we assumed that George W. Bush was going to be reelected president, and we were going to have a new president in 2008, that regardless of party, regardless of who it was, it would be exciting for Denver. And I was born and raised here and believed in it strongly. And I was so excited to be able to cast a vote to have Denver host the 2008 DNC. And so I think partly, and I know that sounds frivolous, it's a party issue, and it kind of seems kind of moot at this point, but it was a fun way to promote something. And I came back to Denver, and people like Elbert Wedgeworth and Wellington Webb and people, John Hickenlooper, and people that were excited about this. Even very conservative Republicans were excited to have the convention in Denver because it brought attention, and it brought income, and it brought, you know, sort of this sense of Denver on the map. It was such an exciting thing to be a part of. And I really am proud of that, because it not only showcased our great city and our great community, but it also really put Denver on the map. And we had the chance to nominate the first African-American president of our lifetime. So it was a really kind of fun, inviting opportunity. But there has been a lot, Kristen, that in my public affairs careers where we have had some trouble reconciling both representing what is in the best interests of the constituency and how we personally felt about something. And that's happened several times. We've represented the Colorado Education Association for a number of years as a firm, and really, you know, going to battle with them on equal pay for teachers, and the fact that we're have a shortfall for teacher pay, and we're having a declination in people even wanting to become teachers, really was a fight that I was passionate about. And while we don't have enough pay for public school teachers right now, we hope to sometime, and we hope to sometime soon. And that's really a passion of mine as well. So it felt good. So although I didn't answer your question directly about something I didn't feel very passionate about, I felt passionate about both those issues, and it was a fun part to be a part of it.
Yeah, and Andy, I wouldn't say that helping to bring the Democratic National Convention to Denver is frivolous. Thank you.
I just meant, you know, you have a mayor on here and a significant senior lobbyist.
No, that's pretty amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sandra, what do you think?
Well, I've represented a whole host of issues over the years, and I've been fortunate by choice. I do not represent things that I don't agree with. There may be some things that I'm slightly agnostic about, but for the most part, the things that I work for are the things that I believe in. I feel as if my work is best when I believe in something. And so I get excited about stuff that I I represent business issues. I represent things that move our economy forward and really elevate everyone. One issue that is I've had a lot of fun around and feel as if we've done some significant work, and I've actually worked with Heidi on this, and that is in the transportation sector. Funding transportation, it's not sexy, but it is so meaningful and important to our economic strength and viability into the future. And about 6 years ago, I began an effort with my clients up in Northern Colorado. And again, Heidi was part of this. The North I-25 corridor was anticipated to not be expanded to 3 lanes until 2075. And that is the fastest growing region in the state. And it became this point of, that's not an acceptable answer. What do we need to do? So I built with our community leaders a strategy to begin to have the conversation about the importance of transportation. And it was very myopic at first, but we expanded it to include the entire state. And we've elevated through that process. We've, despite not seeing ballot questions be successful, through our additional work and our continued beating the drum, we've secured almost $3.5 billion in proceeds or general fund dollars for transportation projects across this state, which is amazing. And out of that $3.5 billion, $1 billion of it is going to the North I-25 corridor. We are on track to have a 3-lane corridor from Fort Collins to just south of Loveland by 2024, I think will be completion. We have more work to do. We've got another $400 or $500 million to get us fully built all the way south, but it has been so incredibly rewarding. But the reward has come not in seeing the construction on the roadway, but the remarkable collaborative work that we did in that corridor and the pulling together of communities throughout the Northern Colorado region towards a singular goal of getting something done. And again, Heidi can speak to that. It really has been a really amazing effort. And again, we're not done yet, but it has been really an honor to sort of forge that effort over the last
Thank you. You know, and what I'm hearing that's pretty seamless through what all of you are saying is that politics is a great way to sort of exhibit your passions, yeah, right? And make you feel good about life and what you're doing. So I think that that's important for everyone on this call today to hear. If nothing else, get involved because you're passionate about things.
Absolutely.
Heidi,
that is I think that is the crux and the sort of the core of any engagement on the political scene. The opportunity to make change stems from passion.
Thanks. Heidi, I kind of want to hear about a situation where you were saying, you know, I'm this party, but I'm representing this. Can you share with us an experience that, you know, you went through when you were mayor?
Yeah, for sure. And to Sandra's point, like I was never that passionate about transportation, but thankfully I was working with people like Sandra and others that were. And so I was able to use my influence, but that was not why I ran for mayor. So I'm gonna like kind of flip it. And there was, we had marijuana banned in Thornton until 2015. I was reelected with 72% of the vote in 2015, which was fantastic. But we also got 3 new city council members who decided they wanted marijuana to be allowed in Thornton. And I was very passionate about that not happening. I have a son who has a marijuana addiction as well as my ex-husband. So it was an emotional thing for me. And I've never voted off of emotion until that particular vote. We did all this research. I had all this stuff that I talked about and just used my best, you know, skills to try to negotiate. Anyway, it was a 5-4 vote. I was on the losing side. So what I did is I became passionate about making sure that Thornton had the very best policies, the very best regulations, the very best dispensaries in the state. So what we did is we looked at Aurora and Denver, and thank you, Denver and Aurora, for having, you know, kind of forged the way and made the mistakes so that, you know, when we legalized it and allowed it here, we didn't have the mistakes. We actually did have one of the dispensaries that ended up losing their license for looping, which is it's where you go in and keep buying an ounce at a time, but you just go back the same day. That's illegal. They ended up, you know, having to go out of business, but they'd only been in Thornton for like a month. So that actually was a bummer. But the other dispensaries we have are very, very good business people. They're very ethical. They only allow 21-year-olds and above, which was one of my issues. I hated the fact that, you know, 18-year-olds can get medical marijuana. That was one way my son was able to get it from his wrestling injury. So that was what I did. And I think that built a lot of respect among my colleagues, because they knew how passionate I was about it, about not having it. But once we allowed it, I just went all in to make sure that it was the very best possible situation for our citizens. And you know what? The sky didn't fall. And I think that that's something that we forget sometimes, is that just because it's not something we wanted, or just because something we wanted didn't happen, it's not the end of the world. We are a democracy, and we have to listen to what other people want. And sometimes we don't get our way. And I actually cried after that vote. When I got home, I was very sad. But then I just, you know, I kind of like was, buck up, little camper. You just gotta do what's right. And I would imagine if it went to a vote of the people, it would have passed too. So that was just, for me, was harnessing my passion, my emotion, and going, okay, well, let's do it the best way we possibly can. So, and I will tell you, the reason I ran for mayor was to make small business in Thornton amazing. And we have one of the most robust and amazing small business efforts in the state. And we kick butt with small businesses. And that makes me really happy that the one thing I really went in to do got done. So we have a great economic development team that focuses on small businesses. So yay, Thornton.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good story, Heidi. Thank you so much for sharing that. We all need to, I feel like that message resonates right now. Buck up, little camper. We all need to hear that right now.
Totally.
Okay, I think that, so we have time for 2 more questions. There's one really good one in the chat. And we have about 6 minutes left. So I'll just remind the panelists of that when they're answering, so we can get to both questions. So how do you see politics playing a role in our economic recovery and COVID response? And Councilman Herndon, I think I'll start with you on that.
Sure, and I'll be brief. It shouldn't in our COVID response. You know, interesting enough, you know, the 2 major parties have different political views on the economy. And so whoever's in charge, you should let your thoughts and your belief lead the economic response. And the voters have decided who's in charge, and you have that right. For COVID, it shouldn't be at all, because COVID should be based on facts and data. And it's just disappointing that COVID has become such a political topic, because I can share with you, as someone who lost my grandmother to COVID, I would not wish a virtual funeral on anyone. And that's what happened to our family in April. So it's disappointing that COVID has become that political football, because I can tell you, as someone who has experienced personally, I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. So I'll be brief. That's my comments.
Thank you. Sandra.
Yeah, I would agree. Politics should not play a factor. And, you know, it's unfortunate. Well, COVID's an unfortunate circumstance anyway, but it's unfortunate the timing in which it came about in an election year. Had it happened perhaps even 3 years ago or 2 years hence, I honestly believe there would have been a different reaction to it, and a more of a greater coming together in responding. In fact, we saw that, if you recall, in March and April, there was this unanimity around and a togetherness that we hadn't felt in a very long time, the 3 years prior, and the need to sort of work together. And then it began to really fade away. And it was at the point at which politics was being really thrown into the mix. So I agree, politics has no place in this. And my hope is, because the elections are over, that we can really begin to look forward and have meaningful, thoughtful, science-based responses responses to the situation.
Thank you. Andy.
Totally agree. I'll be even more brief. So well said. Science, technology needs to lead this effort, not politics. There actually is no room for politics in this discussion at all. To the councilman's point about the economy, yes, there are differences on how to bring the economy back and how to make an economic recovery happen. But at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. It goes back to our previous answer before. We all want the same thing. We all want economic recovery. We all want a sustainable economy. And we want COVID to go away. And so all of that put together, there is another example of commonality, which we can work together and work decisively to get these things solved. So politics has no place. And I believe, to Sandra's point, if it was 2 years ago, I think politics would play less of a role. It would have played much less of a role. And perhaps we would have a different response than we had now. So absolutely agree and concur with my panelists.
Thanks. Heidi.
Yeah, so I work on opioid response for the state now, and it's kind of the same thing. First of all, let's get rid of stigma. Let's really rely on our public health officials and those who are treating people. And I'm gonna go back to the same thing I say all the time. This is a human issue. This is not a political issue. Let's make sure that we're treating this as a human issue. My dad's been in the hospital. I haven't been able to go see him. You know, Councilman Herndon experienced a total tragedy, and not being able to be with family and be close. That's a human issue that we need to address as humans, not politicians.
Thanks, Heidi. Okay, we're gonna do this last one really fast in 1 or 2 words. There's a question in the chat, and I'm going to phrase it to fit both. How do we keep our chin up right now, given everything, you know, as we heard, like on social media? How do we keep our chin up, and how do we engage? Briefly, couple words. Sandra.
We rely upon that hope and our contribution to the conversation, and so just hopefulness, just maintaining that hope.
Yeah. Councilman Herndon.
Give yourself grace. All the things that are happening, it's okay to say, you know what, it's just give her and your fellow neighbor, give some grace during this time. We will get through this.
Thanks. Andy.
Resiliency. We have proven in this country time and time again that we are resilient people. We are strong people, and we'll get through this together. And I think with grace, with compassion, I think compassion is really needed. More compassion is needed. And if you feel like you're not giving enough, you're not giving enough. Give more.
Thanks. Heidi.
Don't assume that you know someone and how they're feeling or what they're thinking or what they believe. Have conversations and, you know, be open to listen.
Thank you. I have to say that was probably the most engaged facilitation I've ever done. I needed that message today so badly. You all are amazing. I mean, I want to go to coffee with all of you in the same room someday soon. I feel lifted up and more inspired than ever. Thank you for giving us your time and your energy and your stories today. I so appreciate all of you, and I appreciate all of you for being on the call and asking questions. There's resources in the chat that we talked about earlier for finding out information on ballot issues. And thanks again for coming to the Colorado Women's Chamber and being engaged. Have a great day.
Thank you all.